This is a very exciting podcast today on Faithful Freedom with Teryn Gregson because we are expanding the podcast network here at We The Patriots USA. That's right, I can call it a podcast network now because we have Kristen Meghan, her new show, Vets and Visionaries, which just premiered on Monday, January 23rd. She is joining us to talk about her story. Yes, she is a veteran and she is a expert on all the masks and the PPE. I had her on Faithful Freedom in season 1 as we were talking about masking, really at the height of everything. So we're going to talk to her. She's a scientist, she's a mother. She is going to just be such a wonderful addition to us here at We The Patriots USA. And we can't continue to grow like this without you. We need your support to continue to bolster this education arm of We The Patriots. So head over to wethepatriotsusa.org, and I pray that you will find it in your heart to give to this organization doing so much to protect and fight for our freedoms here, not just only around the mandates, but around what's happening in our schools, the trans curriculum, the CRT, religious exemptions for kids being taken away in these schools. And we're here to keep you informed and on top of everything that's happening. So please continue to give, and please continue to like our videos so we can get this information out there to people. Well, I'm so excited to interview our very new podcast host here, Kristen Meghan, coming up. Where do we go from here? Because the battle has just begun. As eyes open, we continue to arm ourselves with the truth in all aspects of our lives, asking questions and relentlessly searching for answers, educating ourselves and forging a new path forward. Hear from real people faithfully pursuing freedom. This is Faithful Freedom with Teryn Gregson, presented by We The Patriots USA, a nonprofit 501c3 organization working to preserve and reclaim our God-given inalienable rights. Kristen, welcome to the team. Welcome to We The Patriots USA, and congrats on your new show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to join the team. I'm friends with so many members of the team, and I was so appreciative when I was asked if I wanted to join and give a new perspective on a new show.
Yeah, and before we talk about your new show, Vets and Visionaries, which I can already tell it's awesome by the title of it. Let's give people a refresher. If people didn't listen to the episode that you and Tammy were on in season 1 here on Faithful Freedom, give people a little refresher on who you are and what your background is.
Yeah, so I am, of course, Kristen Meghan. I am a 20-year industrial hygienist. No, it's not a dentist. And no, it's not an industrial cleaner. I'm an exposure scientist, and I'm an Air Force veteran and whistleblower. And I take my oath very seriously. And there just seems to be a pattern of the government sticking its hand into my profession, but not really doing it correctly. And when the pandemic started and we saw masks being mandated, vaccines being mandated in the workplace, my colleague Tammy Clark and I definitely knew that is not legal. And it is not, masks are not the proper risk mitigating apparatus to utilize in a pandemic when we're dealing with this type of hazard. So we kind of sprung into action, became expert witnesses on this subject. I mean, we've been expert witnesses in our professions for years, but I can't say that I've ever had to be an expert witness in a custody case because one parent wants their child to sleep in an N95 respirator.
Oh my goodness.
So the world lost its mind, and I always say I use my powers for good. So yeah, for 3 years now, I've been standing up against the illegal mandates. And at the same time, I'm also an activist, media correspondent, and now podcast host.
Yeah, add it to the list. And mom, you got to add that to the
Yes,
top
I'm a
of your
mom
list.
of 2 girls, 18 and 7. Yes.
Most important job in the world, wife and mother. That's awesome. And you're you're talking about how you were helping people to try to educate people because there was just such a blanket of fear cast over all of this, and so many people, like myself included, just felt the evil surrounded by what they were trying to do by masking everyone else up. And You helped me whenever you came on the podcast. I was pregnant whenever my place was telling me I had to wear a mask, and you came along and you gave me the science behind that, and it
Yes.
really helped me.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was very worrisome, and it was quite upsetting. And I'm not bashing MDs, but there was a lot of MDs that stepped outside of their lane and were saying that there's very seldom and small reasonings for people to not be able to don a mask. Means to put on and wear.
Mhm.
But as someone who's been fielding exemptions for mask and respirator use in an occupational setting for 20 years, pregnancy is like an automatic denial of use, not an exemption, denial of use, because there is multiple studies that show when you are covering your face, you increase your respiration rates. And when you are pregnant, what happens is it can impact the metabolic fetal weight. And not only that, if you think about the fact they're impeding your proper gaseous exchanges, and not to get too technical, but we rely on hemoglobin to transport oxygen to our organs. And when you disrupt that method and increase respiration, you're putting more stress on the heart. And when a woman is pregnant, she's already has an increased likelihood of high blood pressure and other issues. So it puts you at a greater risk. And and not only that, but the mask is not protecting you from the hazard that it's supposed to, because they're only designed for droplets of spit and sputum and bacteria, not viral aerosols.
Yeah, which, you know, it's crazy to think that this is still a topic of discussion today. There's still mandates that they're trying to do with these masks.
Yeah.
And we still see people wearing them everywhere. And some people are so used to wearing them now, they're like, oh, well, I'm trying to prevent myself from catching the flu or anything else that's out there, not just COVID. So I'm just going to continue wearing these to keep myself, quote unquote, healthy and disease free. Does that work?
No. No, and we have this information all the way back to 1918. Because again, if you understand what masks are used for, they are only used for large droplets of bacteria, spit and sputum. The flu is viral, and viruses are usually spread via aerosols, unless you're talking about some sort of dermal hazard. But we know that the flu and SARS-CoV-2 are respiratory, which means that when you're dealing with aerosols, they're so tiny that the primary route of entry in the hazard is to inhale those aerosols into the deep lung. And if you've seen anyone wearing a mask, you know that whether it's the flu or SARS-CoV-2, if someone puts their face down, there's a gap here and there's a gap here. And the science is known that if you have greater than 2.5 to 3% leakage, it is absolutely negligible, meaning there's no efficacy. You're not getting any sort of protection or source control when wearing a mask. Now, there's a lot of calculations we do in our career field, and we have figured that it's about 9.5% leakage when you're wearing a mask. And that's if you're just wearing a new mask, not one that you've worn over and over and has been stretched out or have. I see people wearing them when it's snowing and raining, and they're not even thinking about how that moisture is just wearing away at any sort of integrity that mask even had in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, think about when you're skiing or something and you've
Mhm.
got, you're trying to protect the cold from hitting your face and just like, yeah, it's gross. Like, yeah, that's not a
And it's a
good.
huge I always tell people in our profession, anytime we're selecting a control method, you have to first ask yourself, one, is it safe? No. And is it effective? No. And the reason that I say it's not safe is because these were just handed out as a one size fits all, like candy. And one, you have to have a medical clearance, not by law because that's for respirators, but what the mask does on the body is very similar to the bottom of the barrel N95 respirator, which does have that medical clearance requirement. So it's just like I would never do anything one size fits all, not medication. That I always use that comparison. Let's think
Yeah.
about that for a moment. So, can you imagine if the government just handed out medication? Your doctor has to look at your other medications that you're on. They have to look at, your weight, your genetic and human factors. They need to know your medical history, and then one, determine if you can even take that medication, and then also the correct dose.
Mhm.
So when we're dealing with a respirator, it's a medical device, and masks are medical devices also. So when we're going through these, we have to make sure, is this rated for the hazard at hand? Well, it's not. And then we have to think about what is this person's medical history, because things like stroke, bronchitis, asthma, people who are prone to skin issues, dermal issues. That's why you see that perioral dermatitis. It's like in the military, we had people who had shaving waivers. History of migraines, PTSD, claustrophobia, the list goes on, pregnancy. So then we have to determine, is this going to harm them? So it's like we just don't treat these masks for the hazards that they are. Because if I were to just go to a grocery store and see a whole table full of Tylenol, prescription strength Tylenol, people would be up in arms because that can lead to death. Well, if you actually look on the box of these masks and respirators, especially N95 respirators, it will tell you that misuse can lead to death.
Wow.
And that's
Wow.
because of the restricted breathing. And this isn't to scare people, but this is where my outrage comes from. They need to be used in specific settings, and they are not designed to be used greater than 2 hours.
Yeah. And, it's just crazy that it seems to still be a topic of discussion this far into everything. Now that we're, this far into all of this, how do you reflect back on everything that's happened over the past 3 years? To me, it's a spiritual warfare, and the masks are a part of it. And that's, exactly what comes to my mind. What comes to your mind?
Well, I definitely agree that this is spiritual warfare. To me, it's like a demonic agenda. And I know not
Mhm.
everyone will maybe believe that, but you have to ask yourself, how did we allow so many egregious actions to happen to us? And when I look back, and I even just saying over the past 3 years, that is insane to me. We've put up with this for 3 years. For me, I look back and I think I trained for 12 years on pandemic preparedness planning and response. And I am a subject matter expert on respiratory protection. I think I've mentioned before, I've managed the program for over 76,000 employees. I never thought that the professional organizations in my career field and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration would just abandon everything that is one, enforceable by law, but also the gold standard of preventive health. It's like we already know that asbestos is a carcinogen. And we know that we wouldn't continue to use that for insulation in residential homes. And I've always said it's like a fire chief sitting here and hearing the media say, make sure you put water in your grease fire, because people know you don't do that. And that's how simple it is to me. So I just look back and go, how did we let this happen? And that's why it's so important for people to administratively exercise their rights through nothing violent, but administratively. And that's why I love We the Patriots, because they're helping connect people to pursue litigation to not just hold people accountable for violating their rights, but also ensure that we're preserving the very rights we have, because once they're gone, they're gone. I was just talking with my husband the other day, and I said, how did all of this happen in 2 years with this new administration? Like, we just watched so much change, and we watched a pandemic be politicized.
Mhm.
And it doesn't lean right and it doesn't lean
No.
left. And science is always debatable, and things should always continue to be verified. But that's where my profession comes in. We always have to verify confidence in controls that we put in. And we know that masks don't work. We know that N95s don't work. We know that none of those respirators work except powered air purifying respirators. And even with that, all we needed this whole time was engineering controls. And I just watched all the money get misused and spent on other things. And that's just, to me, that's complete fraud.
And the fraud happened. Part of that was with masks, something you have, it's been a tool in your profession, for most of your profession.
Mhm.
And here they used it for such evil, because those people, they did know that they didn't work. And then they weaponized them against people. So not only did they use them against, to discriminate against people that were not vaccinated, but then they also use them as a, badge of honor for people who lined up to agree with everything that they wanted them to agree with. It was such a polarizing scenario that they use these for. And I think that so many people now are trying to heal from all of that, because it was hurtful for a lot of people, and they were used as a weapon.
Yeah, it was just a purposeful divide.
Mhm.
And if we're supposed to have freedom and justice for all, I just don't understand how it became. I said, like, we lived in the Truman Show.
Yeah.
And it's like you really could tell, if someone wasn't wearing a mask, you assume they were this way. If they were, they weren't. And it was bad because I got labels thrown on me and wrong assumptions about how I lean or don't lean when just stand for science and truth. And I don't like how it felt like a scarlet letter,
Mhm.
it's just dividing us. That's a huge problem that I have, and that's one thing I talk about on my new podcast is uniting people through solutions and just realizing that we don't have to let any government entity from either side of the aisle tell us to be enemies. And
Mhm.
we have got to open the avenue for free speech. So I have a TikTok account and I was actually promoting my podcast on the TikTok account. And do you know that I got flagged for violating community standards?
For Vets and Visionaries, podcast.
Yes.
Yes. That's
So,
crazy.
I mean, and everyone, I'm sure you've heard this too. The
Mhm.
old saying is, well, if this is dangerous or if this is wrong, then how come the media is reporting it? And I don't know about you, but the worst part of all of this is I've kind of been awake to everything going on in the world for many years and I've had my eyes wide open. But I kind of wish I didn't know what I know because I miss the days of just watching the local news after dinner and believing what was said. And then you realize it's just a script. And that is the one good thing about kind of the death of the legacy media, and allowing people just to be grassroots journalists and have their own podcasts and have their own media outlets because people are able to not just see the two sides of a story, but a third eye view of the story,
Mhm.
kind of a 10,000-foot view. Because I don't know about you, but I don't know if you've lost any like friends or colleagues throughout the past couple of years, but I have.
Oh,
And
yes.
what I was told is, how dare you speak out about these things when you're not a doctor? And that narrative has been embedded in the minds of many because people just think, and the funny thing is I actually have a white coat,
I was
but
gonna say.
the white coats are always, if a doctor says it, it must be right. But
Mhm.
everyone has limitations in their specialties.
Yeah, and I come at it from a completely different angle. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I'm a sports reporter, and I was just trying to do what was best for myself, for my family, for my now 9-month-old baby,
Um,
and also stay true to my beliefs. And I just saw the the evil that was happening and being used in all of this. And my eyes were starting to open to a lot of things prior. This very much accelerated all of that. I think a lot of people have experienced that as well. And to be able to for me to be able to come on here and tell people's stories has been so much fun. I don't know if I should say fun, because some of the stories are very tragic and very sad, but
sure.
it has been an honor, I guess I should would be a better word to say. But it has been wonderful to connect with people as well, in that regard, in that respect. So tell us who you're going to be talking to on your new podcast. I love the fact that you have that military background. Dawn Jolly, who's one of the co-founders of We the Patriots, also has that military background that she brings to the table. And I think that that's so special and that's so wonderful. And it's wonderful that we're bringing that into the team.
Yes, and she was part of the first show that we interviewed, which is available now if your viewers want to go over to the Rumble channel and check that out. So, the goal of this podcast, other than the first introductory show, is to interview other veterans and visionaries. And there's a lot of veterans that have done amazing things, even through the pandemic. And other veterans that have solutions to some ideas that involve. Um, how do we squash the divide that we have? How do we find better ways to take care of our veterans? And also, how can we get other veterans to help us? Because when you take an oath, now it's like if you say that you uphold your oath, you're an extremist. And we need to create a vision of new ideas, whether someone's a veteran or not. And doctors take oaths,
Mhm.
lawyers take oaths. There's so many people that take oaths in their professions, and it's so important because you need to be held accountable to that. So the type of guests on the show are people, again, who are providing solutions, because we have heard a lot of problems, and now we need to go over that curb and start finding ways how we can make life better for everyone and have louder voices that are less censored.
I think that that is so key, and I I have 2 young children. You have an 18-year-old and a 7-year-old, correct? So you
Yes.
have kids just slightly older than mine. We're kind of covering those different age ranges and the viewpoints that we bring to this, and, um, you know, that's what we both want, I think, out of both of these shows, and I think everyone, all of our listeners and the audience and people that hopefully we're bringing in to this, take away from what We the Patriots is trying to do as well, that this is not, left versus right. This is
Mhm.
not I'm very outspoken about my faith. Yes, my podcast is a Christian show, but this isn't just a Christian conservative show. No, that's not what this is about. A this is about us, the people,
Mhm.
taking our rightful powers back into our hands, and I mean that in a grace-filled way, right? And like you said, in a respectful way. You're bringing that angle to this as well from that military standpoint, and I think that's what you're trying to get at there, right? That it's just we it's sort of we the people versus the powers that be, and
Mhm.
the military is supposed to bridge that gap, right? You
Mhm.
guys are working for the government. You're putting your lives on the line, goodness sake, for we the people. And I think that that's a very special and unique role that you're going to be showcasing with these people.
Yeah, and what a lot of people may not realize is, I know for me and a lot of people that were on active duty when I was, you are praised and people thank you for your service, which, by the way, I prefer people say thank you for your courage, because a lot of veterans are not happy with things that they saw or were asked to do. So just a little piece of advice, thank you for your courage is usually most appreciated,
Oh, I like
for
that.
veterans to hear. Yes. Um, we are praised and we are thanked. And then when we leave service, we are a number.
Yeah.
And it is very difficult to navigate your way through the VA. It's very difficult to transition into now being back to being the civilian. And I want people to realize that with the training and the organization and the paying attention to detail that veterans have, there's such good assets to bring into a workforce. Especially when you need to have employees that understand the importance of not doing anything that violates civil liberties. So we have to go back to thanking and appreciating the people that had a courage to sign up and serve, or even were drafted and served. Because when people stop and go, how did we let this happen? Or when people are afraid, I just saw Illinois banned assault rifles. Um, how did that happen? It's a clear violation of our Second Amendment.
Hmm.
And I'm not telling the people uprise and be violent, but what we need to do is we need to have people like the sheriffs in Illinois who have said, we are not going to enforce this because they took an oath and they
Hmm.
are not supposed to violate the rights of their citizens. And also, in the violation of civil liberties, I'm cross credentialed in public health. My husband's actually a public health professional. And in his public health law policy book, it's very clear. There's a whole chapter in what during a pandemic or any sort of outbreak or epidemic, you don't violate the civil liberties of the people.
No, absolutely, and I think that it showed the true colors of, the objectives of those in Washington on both sides, on all sides of the aisles, and,
Mhm.
how it's to pad their pocketbooks and not necessarily for us, and many of us that worked for big corporations, we knew it, but we really, we really got that dose during all of this. you talked a little bit about how you're having on veterans who are, visionaries in their own right and thinking of new ways to do things. I try to tell people and empower people to do things on their own now, to go off and start your own business, be a homeschool mom, be a homeschool parent, take everything into your own hands, grow as much food as you can, know your local farmer, things like that. Do you see a lot of veterans that are doing the same thing? I mean, you yourself, you're a freelancer, you own your own business as a veteran. Do you see a lot of veterans doing the same thing?
Yes, and actually, I homeschooled my oldest for 2 years, many years ago. She's in college now.
Yeah.
You'll find that a lot of veterans use their training, and they're either going off the grid or growing their own food, or just as it used to be called. I remember a day when preppers were mocked, and now
Yeah.
people are peacefully prepping is a term that I heard, because you're just the outages in the stores, the inflation, worried about our infrastructure, worried about our cyber attack, just people. I don't think that they're off base by worrying about these things, but a lot of veterans are better prepared to deal with this. And I have kind of seen co-ops where people learn how to do canning and things like that and kind of survive with minimal needs in the event something did happen. So it's just a different lifestyle that we've lived, where we have learned kind of how to take care of ourselves if we're wounded, how to find food if we need it, how to start fires. And, you don't necessarily have to be in the military to know those things, but you definitely learn those things in the military. So, yeah, it's a lot of people lean on each other for people with those types of skills. I have friends who've never served a day in the military that have a lot of these skills, and then they're called extremists. We've got to stop slapping these labels on people who are willing and able to take care of themselves without government programs in the event of some sort of collapse or just some sort of inability to get resources that we need. And I don't mean that to say like the sky is falling, but if you asked me 4 or 5 years ago if I would be denied going to see my cardiologist for my heart condition because I can't wear a mask, I would have told you were absolutely crazy.
It's crazy. I want to talk about that in a second because people are still being forced to wear masks in the hospital and things like that. I want to talk about that, but I do want to emphasize the point that you're making, that it's so crazy that how society has gone to the point where those life skills that you just mentioned, those
Mhm.
things that everyone had to know how to do in order to survive, not that long ago,
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
now considered extreme things. But I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to the fact that, oh my goodness, like we need to know how to do that kind of stuff. It's really funny how society's cyclical in that
Mhm.
way.
I agree.
Yeah. And so I want to go back to that point that you just had about not being able to see your cardiologist. First of all, have you been able to lately?
I have a new
Good.
cardiologist now. So actually, but my first appointment is later this week. So we will see.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope and then pray that you get to see a good cardiologist. And I myself have found doctors that I don't have to wear masks to go into, but I haven't had to necessarily go into the hospital in a situation or anything. But for example, my mother-in-law just had knee surgery, and they made her and her husband wear a mask in the hospital. Like, why? Why? I mean, she was put under for her knee surgery and she's got to wear a mask. Like, that doesn't make sense. When is this going to end?
I had 2 surgeries during these mandates, and
Mm.
I did not wear anything.
Good.
And to tell you it was easy, it wasn't, but I also have ADA Title III protection. But for people who can't tolerate it or don't know their rights, it's not like I'm not special, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just do this for a living, so I know how to make sure that my rights are not being violated. But the problem is a lot of people don't understand ADA Title III and that your inability to cover your face, um, for many reasons. It is an ADA Title III issue. There's a couple more details involved in that, but people have to peacefully say, I'm not doing this. And my thing is, even if people don't have a medical reason, I tell people, say, I don't wear them for health reasons. And that is true because they are dirty. They're actually increasing the spread and they can promote cross and self contamination. And
Yeah.
if you're someone who has anxiety or high blood pressure, putting that on automatically increases your respiration rates, which increases your blood pressure. So you can say, I don't wear them for health reasons. I mean, really, I just want to say, I know they don't work and I'm not playing
Yeah.
the games. And
Yeah.
I have said that before, but you know, I was told recently at one medical facility that they're kind of starting to back away from it. And I honestly think the reasoning is a lot of people are really behind on medical appointments. One of the highest
Yeah.
credentialed people in my career field, I'm not going to like tell their medical things, but I can tell you they inform me that they have missed some very serious testing that they needed done because they won't play this game.
Yeah.
And they, of all people, know that masking is not going to protect you or anyone else around you against an aerosolized virus. You can't outrun a virus, but what you can do is implement engineering controls, which can reduce your exposure above 90%. Or you can do something that's less than 1%.
Yeah, and a lot of these hospitals did those engineering controls. A lot of them put those air filtration systems in, not even just
Yeah, they're
hospitals,
already in.
schools did, like, everybody did.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
they're
they're already
everywhere.
there.
Yeah, and so it just, it doesn't make any sense to me, and if I'm going into a hospital situation, I would like to see my doctor or my nurse's smiling face and not a mask over their face in a scary situation like that personally, which goes back to my whole feelings around the spiritual warfare that's happening with all of this and how they're being used for evil and such. But, I always ask people toward the end of my podcast, where do we go from here? How are we moving forward in all of this? You mentioned that you're seeing some hospitals kind of moving away
Mhm.
from all of this. Where do you see trends going right now?
I see people trending towards moving on. And sadly, I think it's because of upcoming elections, because they had to politicize all this. Both sides did. But I see the page turning because actually a year and a half ago, I went to a county commissioners meeting and I explained what they were doing to the children was awful. I actually told them they're abusing children.
Yes.
And instead of kicking me out, a few months after that, a dialogue started. And my colleague Tammy Clark and I are now working with an architectural engineer, and we're meeting with a company and a state senator, and we are working on a pilot school that's going to implement some new technologies that fall under engineering controls. So we can say, the cases here, are reduced. I know my colleagues have done these in other schools, but it has to be phased in slowly because I wonder how people will react when they realize this is all we needed from the start. But um, the Biden administration's COVID czar, Dr. Jha, he recently came out and said, masks don't work. There's not one single study that show masks work. We need to focus on indoor air quality, which is engineering controls. And I'm over here like, you don't say.
And
But
I think
I got deplatformed for saying that. So
and are you I mean, but you still are. I saw on Instagram that they're still pulling you down for citing studies. Twitter is hopefully now a free zone.
that's the
People
only
are
play. I mean, ever since Elon Musk took over, I mean, regardless of people's views on him, I can now say anything. I can post any study, and I'm not told you have to remove that tweet in order to use your account. I've been kicked off Facebook once already for just saying that we needed engineering controls. That happened in 2020. And the funny thing is I know the exact episode I did on a radio show, and everything I said is now slowly being done. And I'm not some magical being, you know what I'm saying? It's just
yeah.
I had the goal to stand up and say, why aren't we doing this? Because this is what I trained for in pandemic response, and we're not doing it. But I was the one that defamed. I was the one that had hit pieces written about me. And it's bad when they attack you as a scientist. And I mean, pre-pandemic, the things that I could talk about on social media, I never was put in quote Facebook jail, as they say. And I mean, but social media is kind of a necessary evil because that's how we disseminate our news now.
Mhm. Yeah, the episode that I did with you and Tammy, that got taken down immediately from YouTube.
Yeah,
They
of
pulled me
course.
off there. I'm in YouTube jail all the time. But I I think that too, you might lend a little bit of expertise, or I shouldn't say expertise, but I almost feel like there's a sort of PTSD
Mhm.
that's happened with people. Do you feel the same way as someone who's
Yes.
probably seen that firsthand herself?
I'm someone with PTSD, and I agree with you actually. PTSD is just post traumatic stress disorder.
Mhm.
And what has happened here over the past 3 years is traumatic for a lot of people. And some people may think, well, that's just, abusing that diagnosis. No, it's not. Trauma can come in many forms. People lost their children over these issues. People
Mhm.
lost their parents, their grandparents. People thought that a plexiglass at the checkout, even though it's here and you pay over here, is
Yeah.
going to protect you. And the trauma also comes in a form of the very people that you thought that you could trust. People are learning lied to them and
Mhm.
willfully. And it was willful through all these Twitter files that are being exposed because you know that the top doctors and scientists were throttled or taken off Twitter altogether and other social media platforms. So there's so many different layers of trauma that have occurred over these past 3 years. And I will never forget being in North Dakota testifying with my colleague to aid in helping pass a bill that would ensure no one could be discriminated for not being vaccinated. And I had to listen to a psychologist explain that a 9-year-old shot herself because she couldn't wear a mask again. A 9-year-old.
That is just horrific and brings tears to my eyes, and just that makes me so angry for what has happened. And I have two small children, so I didn't necessarily see firsthand to the kids who are old enough, to understand these things. I mean, I'm wondering myself how my 2-year-old daughter is perceiving when she's seen people with their faces covered.
Mhm.
How does she take that in? But I mean, your kids were right in the thick of it. How are they now? How do you already seen things as repercussions, or the
Mhm.
aftermath rather?
Yes, and the only reason I'm answering it in the way that I am is because my 18-year-old has given speeches about this.
Mhm.
This really impacted her. She had an exemption due to her debilitating anxiety. She has really bad facial claustrophobia, like the type of people that can't put the covers over their head or in the car, if heat's blasting in their face, they panic. And luckily, her school handled it pretty well, but then you're singled out. And then people ask you, what makes you special? Why don't you have to wear one? And my youngest was just starting kindergarten, and I scattered to find a school. And my daughter goes to an amazing private Christian school. It is the best, most divine thing that has happened to our family. She is thriving there. She's never had to deal with a mask. She's never had to deal with useless mitigation efforts, how they handled everything. There was hardly any cases. They still, made sure if children were out that they had temperature checks. They did everything administratively correctly. They're called administrative controls, but they did not use any useless measures. And they had the most green cleaning, and they consulted with me, knowing that I'm an industrial hygienist, because our actually state OSHA tried to cite them, but it didn't go in their favor.
Well, that's because
Little
they
did
had
they know
you.
I was a parent in that school. So
Yep, they had you on their side. They didn't know who they were dealing with in this, and so I'm just so excited that you are on board here, and you've now made us a podcast network by bringing a second podcast here to the
yes.
team. It's so cool. It's so cool. And I hope that people hear through this interview how much you bring to the table in all of this, how embedded you were. I mean, you were everywhere on so many different interviews that you were
Yes.
doing. I mean, how did have you recovered physically
No.
from all everything?
No, I had a major surgery in August, and we actually, the day before we had that summit, it was called the America's Frontline Industrial Hygienist and Multidisciplinary Support Summit. Basically, we had a full team assembled like we should have had and explained how we would have handled the pandemic. Well, the day after we filmed that, I had my massive surgery. And then it was
Oh,
that healing time. I was actually like, oh, at least I have an excuse not to travel. And it was really hard also because I couldn't fly. I'm
yeah.
actually still actively in litigation with Delta for the discrimination, Delta Airlines. And now that I can fly, it makes it a lot easier. But I put a lot of miles on my car and did all of this pro bono. It's still going on, but I'd say it's died down a little bit. But right when I think I'm about to take a break, I take on a new project or I get an email about another bill that I need to testify for. But I only do it from the bottom of my heart because, like I say, I always use my powers for good. And I was trained by the federal government. And if I need to stand up against my trainer, I will because I took an oath and it doesn't expire.
Oh, I love that. That is the perfect way to end this and the perfect teaser for people of what they can get from you because you don't back down. You're a ball of fire and I love it. And that's why we love to have you on board. Remind people when they can catch your new podcast each week.
Yes, it will be uploaded on the We the Patriots Rumble channel, right where you find your show on Mondays. We're still setting the release time, but the first episode is available now. And just look for the promotions. And you can find me on Twitter at Kristen Meghan, where I'll always be promoting upcoming guests and let you know when these episodes drop.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. We're so excited to have you on board.
Well, thank you.